full professor at the University La Sapienza in Rome, and she is emeritus at the University of Hull in the UK. And she is the only psychologist in the room, as we learned yesterday, and in the whole conference as well, a claim which has been still unchallenged so far. So without further ado, Giuliana, the floor is yours.
Dear me, I'm able to speak actually to large classrooms, and I can hear an echo. Can you hear me without problems? It's okay? Okay, because I hear this echo and it's a little difficult. I'm used to speaking actually to large groups of students, which means that I'm used to project my voice. I don't use microphones. So I hope that I will not speak too loud and just deafen you. I want to thank Jordi and Carmen for inviting me actually to give this small, short course. And I have the impression that probably I will speak to the converts here. And probably most of you already know the things that I'm going to talk about. But anyway, this is my job, and so I proceed with that. And I want to start by presenting a few cases that I encountered in my life. I start with one, the therapy of a very recent case in Italy. It's the therapy of a 7-year-old kid, in which the therapist basically asks the child a number of questions. The therapist is really convinced that the child has been sexually abused, and the child does not remember anything. And so the child keeps denying and denying and denying, and the therapist eventually makes claim like this. I have taken this from actually things that are available on the internet, so I'm not breaching any confidentiality rule here. So the therapist says things like, then your brain said, you know what, I will help you. The child is there sitting and really being a little confused. The worst things that happen to a child. No, your brain did say that I need to save him. If he spends all day thinking about the horrible things done to him, he's not able to do anything else. It is all pain. The brain wants to forget. Sorry, sometimes the W is missing because the key is not working well on my laptop keyboard. It is like what happened here, right? If your finger hurts you, you cannot play. So then your brain told you, I will help you, and told you to forget or not to think about it. And then there must be a part of yourself that is very angry, more than very angry, really very angry. I cannot say that word out loud. And I tell you, this part is right to be really, really angry. And eventually, the child admits, in one form or the other, the sexual abuse. And then there is another case, a case in which a drawing like this has been used by the expert as evidence that, again, the child, it's not the same child, a completely different case, that the child has been subjected to sexual abuse. And basically, the type of evidence that this expert has brought to court are a series of drawings of this type and her interpretation of the drawings. Then there is a probatory hearing of a 6-year-old child, and this is in Spanish because actually I presented this in Peru a number of years ago. Papá estaba or that was keeping a camera. No. But there was maybe somebody that was holding a camera in his hand. No. I mean, can you see how many no's? And then there is the continuation of this, so the insistence. Look, there was this somebody who was keeping a camera. No, a camera. No, this child says, denies again. He didn't do that. But tell me, I knew that there was somebody there. And the child does not answer. So who was keeping that, the camera in the hand? And the child eventually says, he. Okay? And this he was decided that was the father that actually had been the person who has been considered to be the alleged perpetrator all along. And then the father, on the basis of this type of evidence, was actually, the ending of the story was that the court condemned the father for sexual abuse. This is another example. I'm sorry, I cannot present the whole video, and I tried to hide the details here. This is the example of a judge for the preliminary investigation that does the interview of a child. This is a probatory hearing. You know that in Italy there is this system that vulnerable witnesses are heard in a separate area, which in Spanish countries is called the Gazelle chamber, la Camera Gazelle. And usually in Italy, it is the psychologist or the neuropsychiatrist who listens to the child. In this case, the judge for preliminary investigations decided to do it herself. And this is, I think, a very good example of how things should not be done. So I just described the situation. The person that you see sitting there, I hope that you can see the person. So this is the person that I tried to hide as much as I could, is the judge who is receiving the child sitting on the floor. And then when the child enters the room, she starts throwing at the child. Is it me? She starts throwing at the child all those little cars and toys, etc., saying in this tone of voice, "Oh, please play with me, play with me. My child is 16 years old. She no longer wants to play with me. I really want to play with you." And this kid, who was approximately 3, she was looking at this woman and saying, "What does she want from me?" And so she was hiding behind the mother, and behind, there were 3 adults in this room, actually. She was hiding behind the mother. She was avoiding, going close to her. She was not playing at all. And for 1.5 hours, it must be me, I don't know. For 1.5 hours, this hearing occurred like this, with the judge, who was more or less crawling on the floor, chasing the child who was hiding behind the curtains, or standing on the tables, and then trying to unplug a lamp, and then taking all the objects and throwing them on the floor. Eventually, and receiving a large number of calls from the people on the other side of the one-sided mirror, and the situation got really desperate. Eventually, the neuropsychiatrist who was helping in this situation took the child. This is better, right?
Hello?
As you can see, I make too much noise. So, oops. Okay. Thank you so much. So after 1.5 hours, everybody was really desperate. Nothing was happening. The child was saying nothing, and the neuropsychiatrist took the child on her lap,
forced her to sit and said, show me how you do things with your father. Actually, show me, not show me because this would be more normal, but she said exactly, show me how to, I don't know if I can say that in a public meeting, how you lick the intimate parts of your father. And that was, those 2 minutes were considered to be sufficient evidence actually for this case. And another case, there are many, many, many cases like that, that actually I have to, I am submitted and that I have to give my opinion on. And so I think that my question is a question for you. Is this admissible evidence? Is this adequate evidence? I think that there is a difference between admissibility and if something is adequate or not, if you allow me to make this difference. And my other point is, can judges evaluate the methodology used in these cases, in these types of hearing, to decide about whether the information that is obtained in these cases is good enough to be adequate and to be admissible. And I have some doubts about that. So this is the premise, and this is my main question for you. Okay? The way I've decided to organize this, this short course is for me to talk a lot, but also to let you talk as well. Not to let, I mean, to ask you questions. And I think that really I'd like to have, I'd like to have an answer to the question about, you know, is this the, is it possible? These are all cases in which actually there has been a conviction, okay? These cases that I presented to you. And I'm asking, on which basis? On which basis? Because this was basically the main evidence that has been used for the case. The second thing that I want so that I was saying how I have organized this. I have organized this around the 3 principles of the trial in Italy, which is orality, immediacy, and the fact that there is now this adversarial approach in legal cases, of course. And what I want to show is that these 3 principles are principles that are correct in a sort of Olympic view of the trial, but I think that in reality they have some problems. In the Olympic view, they are considered to be the best method of presentation of evidence, orality. Immediacy is the best method to guarantee adequate fact-finding and establishing the truth of facts, the fact that the judge can actually have an immediate contact, a direct contact. And this adversarial method is the best method to guarantee a fair trial. So orality, verbal communication, this is something that I should probably not say because you know it much better than me. Verbal communication is the most appropriate way to communicate content. The possibility to ask questions increases understanding, clarifies misunderstandings and doubts. It guarantees the procedural dialectic. Immediacy, the direct contact between the judge and the witness. I've spoken to many judges and they say it is really important for me to see the witness, to see how the witness reacts, to see how the witness behaves in order to understand what is really happening there and if the witness is reliable or not. It guarantees the judge direct access to the evidence for fact-finding. The evidence in this case is testimony. I'm talking about testimony, of course. And provides the judge with invaluable information about the witness and the characteristics of the content and the way it is reported. So the judge has grounds, direct grounds, to evaluate this. By the way, if I say something that is wrong, please point it out to me. The adversarial principle, both parties are equally involved, both parties are required to present testimonial, in my case, evidence, and it guarantees a fair trial and the rights of the defendants. All this is really true. But I think that psychology provides us with plenty of information to cast some doubt on this. And I think that this information doesn't mean that what I'm proposing is let's overthrow the whole system and these principles that just throw them down the drain. What I'm saying is I think that there is information that we know about how the human mind works that actually might help maybe understand what really happens and revise things, because I think that there is a difference between principles and how these principles are applied and they work in reality. Sorry, I drank something. I was hoping in a coffee here, but there was no coffee. And just one coffee, yes, and I was not alone hoping in a coffee. But you know, just one coffee this morning is not enough. Do you agree? Yes, we all agree, yes. 9 in the morning is like that. And why do I question this? And then I will provide ample evidence, and actually you'll get bored by my evidence. What we are talking is the evidence that psychology provides about the extent to which the report about honest witness, I'm not talking about malingering, I'm not talking about lying, deception, I'm talking about a nice, collaborative, intelligent witness, okay? So, but the extent to which a nice, collaborative, intelligent witness reflects really the facts at hand. And I will talk about the effects of questions and the way they're formulated and how they really change what people report, and also the effect of information. There is a lot of studies on that. For immediacy, I will talk about implicit social judgments and implicit prejudice, and the fact that I think that judges are not immune to that. Judges are human beings, as we all are, and human beings are all subjected to the same principles of functioning, of mental functioning. So there are some universal mechanisms of functioning of the human mind that apply universally throughout cultures, for example, and I think that we're all part of that. And then I will talk also about the role of attention that implicitly people pay to spurious elements for the decision about the credibility, reliability of a witness report. And I will also talk about the need that I find, following the results of the psychological studies, the need that I find to distinguish between the credibility, the principle, the idea of credibility and the idea of reliability, which actually in psychology is called validity, but let's call it reliability, of a witness report versus the credibility, validity of a witness, okay? So I think that there are various levels of distinction, and I think that when I hear people talking about this, and initially people say credibility in general, but really it is very difficult to understand what they mean and which are the criteria that are used for that. And for adversarial principles, I will show, and I think that, I present this at a very superficial level, okay, but I think that implications are really important. I will talk about reasoning biases and the fact that actually the way some information is presented makes that information more powerful, and the way some information is presented makes the information more powerful because of how our reasoning processes work. And so this is the overview in general of the talk. And I think that I will skip the part on testimony, because we all know that testimony is really, really important. I will just point out a few things about that. And then I will make a big premise on the fact that psychology is a science. And again, probably here I'm preaching to converts already, but even yesterday, I was speaking with a person here in the Congress, and I was saying, well, you know, basically I'm a scientist, and he didn't laugh at me completely, but he almost laughed at me. And so, you know, haha, a scientist, psychology, huh. And I said, well, really, look, I do studies, and I use the same methodology that biologists use and chemists use, etc., etc. And he laughed, you know, scored me a little bit. So maybe there is a need for me to remind the audience, if you don't mind, that actually psychology is a science. Okay. And I will provide also some information on the common mistakes that are made in situations like that I presented before, and some information on how actually, on the fact that there are correct procedures that have been proposed and have been tested, and they seem to work better than just, you know, this wild way of assessing, you know, getting the witness report. So the testimony, I just leave this part because I think that it is not that relevant. There is one thing that I want to stress, that in principle, testimony is admissible when limited to matters of which the witness has personal knowledge. I really don't understand what it means. I don't understand what it means. Does it mean that hearsay is excluded? Does it mean that rumors are excluded? I just want to, as a parenthesis, point out that in Italy, the Procura di Milano in 2004, 2009, I don't remember now, actually issued a procedural protocol that was specifically admitting rumors and hearsay as evidence for the preliminary investigation. Okay? So even if you were not, I mean, it's explicitly stated, even if you're not directly involved, even if you were not directly heard or saw anything, but you heard somebody talk about this, or, you know, you heard that there were rumors in the village about this, and so on and so forth, please report, because this will be important for the investigation. Not please report, but it is really important information that the prosecutor will consider. So my question is, does it make any sense? I don't know. I leave the answer to later. I mean, your answers to later. So testimony is considered in many cases a very important type of evidence, and the reason why I have been involved in a number of sexual abuse cases is because usually the evidence available is the report of the victim, okay? Or the alleged victim. And so it really becomes the queen of evidence. There are some statements here that talk about the importance of a witness. In these cases, it is the identification of an alleged perpetrator. And they say, for example, there is almost nothing more convincing than a live human being who takes the stand, points a finger at the defendant and says, that's the one. And as you know, actually, there are many cases in which people have been convicted wrongfully, and we will look at them briefly right now. So we know that even the physical presence of a witness actually has an influence on the decision. In this case, a lot of studies have been done on juries, and so it seems that these types of the problems with testimony is particularly important in juries. And the claim has been that it's particularly important in juries because juries are made of regular people who really know nothing about the situation. And indeed, it is true, there's been a study done on more than 500 people that has shown that what is known in eyewitness identification psychological literature is absolutely not within the jury's common knowledge. So one questions the goodness of the jury system if the jury does not know anything about what well, I'm talking about psychology, but what the scientific literature is about a certain, what has said about a certain series of problems that arise in evaluating the reliability of testimony. And the point is that, is the problem just jurors? Is the system better in legal systems like Italy, where actually the evaluation of evidence is made by judges and not by jurors? So by people who are prepared for the job, who have actually a lot of knowledge about the legal system, and are they immune from, these erroneous evaluations and erroneous decisions? And my point is that probably not because we're, as I said, we are all humans and we all function according to the same principles. And these principles are principles by which we use a sort of relatively implicit, unaware system of taking into account the evidence and then weighing the various components of the evidence. And even if the judge, and actually the first talk about AI dealt a little bit with this, even if the judge is certainly prepared, the brain of a judge is limited and thus cannot possibly take into account all possible information that should be taken into account or that is available. Some information is sort of systematically disregarded, and not because of bad will, not because of inability, but really because the system, the brain, is limited in this ability of taking into account evidence. And we are all subjected to cognitive biases and illusions, and I know that there will be actually another 2 workshops on cognitive biases, so I will leave this part to those workshops. But we are all subjected to cognitive biases, and this is why. The reason is because our mind works according to 2 systems. There is system 1, which is a sort of quick system of reasoning, that is the one that is most commonly used in life in general and helps negotiate life successfully. So decisions are taken on the basis of the minimal amount of sufficient information. And this minimal amount of sufficient information is considered to be enough to make a decision. And the system is very quick. It is necessary because the system that has been developed to cope with dangers, for example. So the system identifies a dangerous situation and then immediately decides that it is dangerous and then reacts. But it should not apply in cases like this, of course, and the preparation of magistrates and judges is actually to take into account and use the other system, which is the system number 2, which is the systematic analytic system of evaluating all types of evidence. But again, our system is limited, and so even if we use system 2, this analytic systematic way of thinking, we never take into account all available information. So maybe AI might really help. I think that I agree with that ponencia that was given before. And then we are all prone also to suggestibility and to the immediate implicit evaluation of others. And then I will go back to these topics later, but I want just to stress at this moment that psychology is a science. And what do I mean by that? I mean that at times when I work as a witness expert in court, the judges tell me, well, professor, you're very nice, but this is just your opinion. And so your opinion just goes against another person's opinion. And I'm saying, well, would you say the same thing if I was a civil engineer? Would you say the same thing if I'm claiming that actually the data have shown that that bridge collapsed because of A, B, C, D, and I say that with a certain degree of probability. Would you say the same thing if I were, legal medical person who claims that actually the evidence tells me, what I've been seeing tells me that with a certain degree of probability I can say that this person has been, that the type of therapy has been the wrong therapy? Well, much less so because psychology is considered to be really a wishy-washy type of endeavor, because we all think that psychology is just therapy, okay? Trying to understand other people, trying to understand other people's problems and addressing other people's problems. Well, that's not psychology. This is just a little bit of what psychology is about. I have to say that there are some people like the witch represented here who make outrageous claims, for example, and this has been the case of a very recent case in Italy, again, of child sexual abuses, and the first excerpt that I presented of the interview with a child in which the psychologist was trying to induce a memory in the child was taken from this Bibbiano case. And there is also a very recent case, and there are many cases like that, a recent case in which the expert actually had created her own method of assessing the child, and she swore by it, but it was just her own, no base in the literature, no base in scientific evidence, nothing, just what she decided would be important to use for that case. So there are situations which it is true psychologists actually have their own opinion, but actually psychology is also, and just I skipped this thing, but psychology is also a very serious scientific endeavor that uses a lot of very rigorous methodologies, because we deal with very subtle issues, of course, but the rigorous methodology allows us to make strong claims about phenomena, mental phenomena, about cognitive phenomena that are now established as, because there have been many, many studies that show exactly, more or less exactly the same thing, that are now established to be the way our mind works. And so, as we say right now that, it is established that there is a DNA, that the DNA works like that, we can say that, for example, we are influenced by questions. We can say now that memory is malleable, and I will get to that later. So we can make strong claims because there is a lot of scientific evidence. And the other thing that I want to say is that not all psychology is the same. So psychoanalysis, which is usually confused with psychology, is only one small branch, one small approach within psychology, small and a minority one nowadays. And clinical psychology is just one of the main areas in psychology, and psychotherapy is one application within psychology, so it is not really what psychology is about. Psychology is about the various aspects on how the human mind and the human behavior works, and this is what we usually study, and this is why we can make these strong claims that I was telling you about. So the question here is, can any type of psychologist become an expert witness in a case? Can any type of psychologist actually examine examine people who are witnesses, for example, or who are involved in legal cases? And my answer is no. So people need to have a specific preparation for that, as you would not entrust a civil engineer to build your own computer, or vice versa, or a dentist to perform a brain surgery. The same thing is in psychology. You need to choose the right psychologist for the right type of job. And so there are forensic psychologists that are prepared specifically for this type of task, and these are the ones that need to be consulted, and not, for example, clinical psychologists who have a completely different mindset, or developmental psychologists who know nothing about anything about forensic interviewing, for example, and things like that. So what is psychology? Again, just to stress this part. It studies behaviors, it studies mental processes, and it is a science in the sense that it uses precise and careful measurements. It prevents possible biases from, that could lead to faulty observations. So it is really a careful mental process. It is objective and systematic. Its goal is to describe, explain, predict, and control behavior and mental processes. Not control mental processes, but control the way mental processes are studied, basically. And this is exactly the same thing that you see as a description of physics, okay? So we use the same methodology. I think actually we use a little more sophisticated methodologies than physics, to be honest. It has many different types of scientific methods that it uses. The one that leads to the strongest results is the laboratory method or the quasi-experimental method that entails a number of steps that need to be followed. And so the papers that are published in the literature are papers that follow this type of methodology and that should be strong enough to pass the screen of the reviewers. And when people refer to papers and scientific evidence, well, it has been published, it doesn't mean anything, it has been published. Because there are different levels of scrutiny in the review system, as you all know, being academics. So in psychology too, there are many different levels of review. And you need to ensure that these papers that the expert witness refers to are papers that come from the best journals, the ones that have a high rate of rejection, because this guarantees that the methodology and the results are really reliable. And this just to give you some examples of results and that are that can be presented. For example, the first one is on action perception. The fact, and I will give you some examples later, the fact that when we perceive actions, we do not only perceive actions, but we perceive also the continuation of the actions, and we remember the continuation of the actions as if we saw it. Or, for example, in assessing the calibration of culpability judgments, we can understand the amount of bias that there is in the judgment that people make about culpability. So we have really sophisticated mathematical methods that allow us to do that. And this one is, again, an example of how fillers in police lineups are selected, and so so it is possible to measure the similarity among the various faces or the entire body of people in a lineup, and we can decide which to use and which not to use, and which is correct and which is not correct to use, based on mathematical examination of the characteristics of these people. So it is not just words what we do, okay? It is really a scientific enterprise and a very sophisticated one, just to give you an example. This happens a lot in face recognition, for example, the identification of culprits. It happens a lot also in reasoning and decision making. It happens a lot also in my own specific area, which is memory. So I think that we have strong enough evidence that needs to be used by, that is important to be known, at least, by by people who then are involved in legal cases. So let's go now. Well, no, I want to stop here. Do you have questions, comments so far? No questions, no comments? Okay. I hope that you're not all asleep already, given the lack of coffee, of morning coffee. So, orality and reliability of a witness report. Do witness report what they have seen? I think that there is a sort of what is called naivete in this sort of reality approach that we have that is very important for us. That is very important for us to negotiate life. So we assume that what we see is there. We assume that what we see is the way we see it, but actually it is not. So we know that there are perceptual illusions, and these perceptual illusions are something that we cannot escape. We know that these lines are parallel. We know that, but we cannot help but seeing these lines actually slanted. We know that these two horizontal lines are the same length, but we cannot help but seeing the lines of different length. And why? Because of the visual organization of the stimulus. The stimulus is organized in a way that the brain calculates relationships, and the result of the calculation of the relationships is what we actually see, okay? So slanted lines, for example. We see two Pisa towers, but we see them how? How do you see these towers? Leaning. Okay, do you see them parallel? The one on the right leans a little, doesn't it? Okay. You know what? It does not lean at all. These are exactly the same picture, juxtaposed one next to the other. Exactly the same picture, the same photo. Why is that we see that one is a little slanted to the right? Yes?
It's because the brain Es porque nuestro cerebro fija una imagen.
Is it because our brain fixes an image and then compares it with another one? When we observe that, we get a reference point and we project that with the initial point.
So the answer is we have a point of reference and we compare that point of reference. So we compare the two referring to that point of reference initial that we have decided. Is that the answer? Okay. Well, it's not exactly that. Anybody else has an answer? A suggestion? Yes?
Se me ocurre que
For example, we have this concept about the place. We know that the tower leans, and then, of course, when we see it leaning to the right. Yeah.
It is this preconception that they're leaning. Well, it's not exactly that. Thank you. You know, Vitor is a lifesaver. Oh, I feel better already. You know, this is a psychological effect because the caffeine in there has not kicked in. No, it's not that. Anybody else?
I can't figure out how this would work. Could it be something to do with the different background colours?
I'm sorry?
Could it be to do with the one on the right having a... The one on the right seems to have a slightly darker background. Could that affect
A slightly darker background, the one on the right. No, it is not that. Anybody? Yo. Well, maybe then I have...
creo que ese
I think it has to do with the principle of perception. The principle of perception, when we observe the whole
percepción, ¿cuál principio de la percepción?
Hay una...
There is a premise, or there is a rule, which means that if we observe things separately, then we can perceive something different than when we look at things generally as a whole. So that's why it's better to see things separately before we see all of them together.
Single part before observing the sum of it all? You're getting there, but not exactly that. Yes, one there. And then I stop this, otherwise we will go on forever. But I think that this is a good example.
I don't know anything about this, but I can guess our brain is not designed to perceive two objects exactly the same.
Our brain cannot decide to perceive two objects to be exactly the same. No, it's not that. You know what it is? Think about the way you see two parallel lines that go in the distance. They converge to un punto di fuga, to a point in which they converge. These are parallel lines. So think about you looking at the lines of the tracks of a train. You look them from here, and they converge in the distance. This is called perspective. Perspective, okay? It was then painted by Paolo Uccello for the first time in a reliable way. So what the brain tells us is that there is no converging point there. The two, they just sit next to each other. If they were parallel, since we perceive that they're high, okay, they're tall, we know that they cannot be parallel because they don't converge. So in order for us to see them to be parallel, well, they should actually slant towards each other, towards the top, okay? And that's the way our brain is wired to perceive things that are actually parallel in the distance. And then I have another example. So I don't know if it works here, but do you see the squares, the dark squares. You see the gray lines, right? You see the intersection across the gray lines. You see the white dots there. Do you see the white dots? Yes. Do you see any black dot? Do you see any black dot? Yes. You see the black dots. Do you see that the black dots actually don't exist? Because they move with your eyes? The black dots move with your eyes because they're just simply the result of the calculation that your visual system does in your brain. And the calculation is very simple in a certain sense because it calculates the differences in light intensity that comes from those various areas of the figure, okay? And the dots don't exist, but you see them. So, it is very difficult to think that reality is really what really perceive. We perceive what our brain allows us to perceive. We perceive what our brain is wired for us to perceive. In a very efficient way, we negotiate life perfectly. We can drive, we can do everything. We can go upstairs, downstairs, we can look up and down, etc. We can recognize people. That is due to the way the brain works. And the brain computes, because there are algorithms in the brain, the brain computes the various visual elements that are presented to us. And here I have another example. So, which is the color of the small square? I see that you see a big square, a big rectangle that is on the bluish side. Which is the color of the small rectangle here? Green. Gray. Gray, isn't it? Okay. How many of you say that it is yellow? None. How many of you say that it is red? None. It is red, isn't it? So here you see the same, it is just masked. I just put a mask on it. I just put this thing that covers. Here you perceive it red, with a little greenish hue to it, okay? With a little greenish stain to it. But actually, you know that this is red. And why this is the right color, it is green, green-grayish, with a little white. But here, in this case, we perceive red. And why do we perceive red? We perceive red because we know that it is red. If we knew that these were, I don't know, green tomatoes, we would perceive it green. If we knew that these were yellow apples, we'd perceive it yellow here. But the real color is this one that you see here. And not only that, but which is the color of the bar under the strawberries? Reddish, right? It is reddish. Well, I can tell you that it is not. It is definitely gray. This to say that actually what we perceive is not necessarily what is there. What we perceive is something that is the combination of what our brain allows us to perceive because of these calculations and our knowledge. There are these top-down processes that strongly influence our perception. Why am I talking about this? Let me see what comes next. And I have another example that I bring all the time because actually if you haven't seen this, you don't know exactly what it is. But once you have seen this, when you have seen what is in there, you will never be able to see this figure again without immediately seeing the objects in there. So there are two objects in there. And this is another example of the fact that when we say, I've seen this, it means, actually, I have interpreted this type of situation. And this is not just for these very simple, simple situations here, these very simple situations, but it happens in general in life. Our brain, our mind is something that works in order to make sense of the experience, make sense of the sensory experiences that is the basic input that we have for our information and again, how to negotiate life. But really, also for the witness. The witness says, I've seen this. Well, the witness says, I've seen this, and it's honest, collaborative, handsome, whatever you want. But what he really or she really means is, this is the way I interpreted the situation. And so in interpreting the situation, it means that he has actually given to the situation, superimposed to the situation, the knowledge and the expectations that a person has. It means that, for example, if a witness has prejudices, those prejudices influence what they report they have seen. It is quite simple, if you want, but also at a very basic level. I've done a number of studies that I haven't published yet because I've started them recently, in which we presented a video, actually various videos, but videos in which there were crimes. They could be theft crimes, it could be pickpockets, it could be exchanging drugs, etc. And the face of the perpetrator was never seen, okay? Never seen directly. So there was a little hood, or they were, turned a little bit in a direction so the face could not be seen. And then we gave lineups for the identification of the perpetrator. And these people did not see the perpetrator, but they're very, very willing to go along with their own prejudices and expectations to identify the perpetrator as either Albanian or Roma, so Gypsy, or North African, etc., etc. Even if the videos were basically done by the same actor, and it really depended on the type of crime and on the type of association that people have in mind between crime and perpetrator. So in Italy, for example, this was done in Italy. In Italy, actually, petty theft are done by East Europeans, exchange of drugs are done by North Africans, and so on and so forth. And people were identifying these perpetrators, which were not them, of course, based on this type of expectations and assumptions that they had. By the way, here, what there is a dog. Can you see the dog here? And there is a tree, and the shade of the tree under the tree. So, really...
Por eso la información se interpreta cuando alguien dice veo. Aquí voy a poner otro ejemplo de expectativas.
14, and here we have...
Aquí leemos A, B, C o 12, 13, pero claro, vemos que exactamente en el medio pone lo mismo, a veces habíamos leído 13 y a veces B, y lo que está influenciando aquí, lo que vemos, no deja de ser el contexto y lo que creemos haber visto. Aquí nadie diría he visto una B y aquí nadie diría he visto un 13. ¿Y por qué sucede esto? Pues porque nuestro sistema visual, nuestro sistema de percepción, lo que quiere hacer es completar elementos, quiere crear una imagen completa a partir de los elementos que no son necesariamente relativos, no se están tocando. Por ejemplo, aquí vemos que esta línea no se está tocando con la parte de la derecha, pero nosotros completamos lo que queremos ver. Entonces, a veces lo leemos como una B, lo completamos, si lo leemos como un 13, no lo completamos, depende. Y todo esto sucede, no realmente de forma inconsciente, pero sí por debajo de nuestro nivel de conciencia. Y todas las personas funcionan así. Yo aquí también leo beard y estamos leyendo una A fácilmente y en realidad no es una A, pero la completamos. Y aquí leemos de todos modos las palabras de abajo, que aunque estén mal escritas, entendemos perfectamente lo que aparece. Creamos una frase, es decir, nuestra mente aúna las cosas y les dota de significado. Aquí pongo otro ejemplo sobre estudios que yo he llevado a cabo con colaboradores y aquí hemos mostrado que esto tiene un efecto en la memoria. De hecho, hay muchos estudios sobre este tema. Si miramos esto de aquí, esta mujer aquí arriba a la izquierda que está agarrando una botella de esta manera, ¿qué diríamos que percibimos y recordamos? Lo de aquí a la derecha, aunque nunca se ha presentado así. En realidad, cuando alguien informa sobre lo que ha sucedido, dice que esta persona de aquí estaba agarrando la botella para beber. ¿Bien? Y entonces reconoceremos después esta imagen de aquí como si es la que hubiéramos visto. En este caso, en cambio, la botella se coge, se agarra de una manera diferente, ligeramente, como podemos ver. Y al final lo que informamos es esto que aparece aquí abajo, que tampoco es. Entonces, estamos percibiendo no exactamente lo que se nos presenta, sino lo que nos imaginamos, podríamos decir. Imaginamos la continuación de las cosas, la continuación de las acciones, y esto es muy importante cuando las personas informan sobre lo que ha sucedido en una escena del delito, porque cada uno cuenta lo que ha visto, pero también cuenta lo que su cerebro ha completado. Tenemos una especie de simulación mental kinesmática y que nos permite seguir la escena, continuarla, seguir con la acción, hasta que más o menos es algo completo, algo que ya tiene sentido. Entonces aquí, a ver, alguien que está agarrando una botella en medio de nada, decimos, no, ¿qué es esto? Pero en cambio pensamos, bueno, está agarrando la botella porque es para hacer algo con ella. Ah, pues entonces le damos un sentido. Y aquí la inclinación de la botella, por ejemplo, pues importa mucho. Ha habido muchos estudios. Este es un estudio antiguo que no me pertenece a mí, pero se presentaban distintas imágenes. Una persona que se iba a un supermercado y en algún momento se veía una diapositiva en donde se caían las bolsas al suelo y se rompían los huevos, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces se preguntaba a las personas que reconocían y reconocían a esta primera imagen de aquí. Muchos, puedo decir que el 70%, 75% aproximadamente de las personas a las que se les preguntó reconocían esta primera imagen, pero en cambio también reconocían en un 60-65% esto de aquí, cosas que nos habían presentado. Es decir, representaban la causa de lo que ellos habían percibido. Entonces ellos percibieron eso, vieron eso, y no, en realidad lo que vieron fue lo del medio y se reconoció esto. reconocían una potencial causa del efecto. Es decir, creamos inferencias, avances, simulaciones, también creamos inferencias hacia atrás de lo que vemos. Y recordamos causas que no hemos visto. Y recordamos cosas, no digo, bueno, tal vez esto es porque. No. No lo decimos de forma inferencial, no reportamos ese componente como tal, pero sí que informamos sobre algo como si verdaderamente lo hubiéramos visto. Y entonces recordamos cosas que no hemos visto. Con esto quiero decir que suceden muchas cosas en nuestra mente y son bajo nuestra conciencia, por debajo de nuestra conciencia. Nosotros no sabemos que está pasando esto continuamente en nuestra mente y esto nos ayuda a que el mundo tenga un sentido, a que las experiencias tengan un sentido, pero al mismo tiempo, en ciertas circunstancias, nos hacen cometer errores. Normalmente no importa demasiado, de hecho normalmente hasta ayuda, porque bueno, el sistema es muy eficaz, no tenemos que volver a comprobar 2 veces, 3 veces lo que sea, no perdemos el tiempo, no dedicamos tiempo innecesario para seguir en la vida, directamente en la vida seguimos a una velocidad adecuada. Pero en el caso de los testimonios, las pruebas forenses, pues claro que importa, aquí sí, porque se supone que aquí no queremos tener una idea vaga de lo que sucedió, sino algo exacto, una descripción detallada de los hechos. Aquí muestro otro ejemplo que muestra que la memoria es maleable. Aquí se pidió a las personas que se imaginaran una cuestión que nunca les había sucedido tal cual lo estamos viendo aquí. Estábamos totalmente seguros de que esto no había sucedido como tal. Pedimos que se imaginaran a una enfermera cortando un poco de la piel del meñique de esta niña para hacer un test de contaminación nuclear. Esto sucedió en la época de Chernóbil, más o menos. Y lo que descubrimos es que si comparamos esto con algo que no había pasado con las personas, con un evento común, las personas normalmente no tenían memorias de este evento. Inicialmente no. Esto de estar cortando un dedo no lo recordaban, un pedacito de piel. Pero claro, luego se pusieron a imaginárselo y entonces empezaron a crear recuerdos para un evento común y para el evento que no había ocurrido. Y entonces no sabemos si estos recuerdos, estas memorias son verdaderos o ciertos. Porque el de la izquierda es uno muy común, les pusimos un ejemplo muy común, ¿no? Entonces quien sea puede tirar de memoria o recuerdos de otros momentos que por lo que sea antes no era capaz de acceder a ellos. Pero en este caso, en el de la derecha, sabemos que eran recuerdos falsos que se habían creado simplemente por el hecho de imaginar algo. Entonces, tras una semana, un mes, las personas acaban recordando cosas que jamás les han sucedido. Y estas memorias son muy buenas, de hecho. Tienen la calidad de un recuerdo real. Y suenan como, era una pequeña habitación gris, y había una mujer alta y rubia, con gafas, recuerdo mi sensación de miedo, el procedimiento duró más de lo que esperaba, había un fuerte olor a desinfectante en la habitación. En fin, este es uno de los muchos ejemplos que aparecieron en este estudio. Y claro, preguntamos a las personas y a expertos en memoria, ¿no?, y recuerdos para que intenten distinguir cuáles son verdaderos y no, a partir del estudio, y no fueron capaces. Solamente nosotros, que sabíamos que esto en realidad era falso porque sabíamos lo que había sucedido y lo que no había sucedido, pues podíamos distinguir y discriminar. Pero los expertos y los peritos no podían porque parecían iguales. Entonces, en realidad, aquí estamos trabajando para testimonios de testigos con un material muy delicado. ¿Y por qué? Pues porque el recordar algo no es extraemos algo del cerebro directamente que está bien colocado y empaquetado, estructurado como unidad. La memoria está reconstruyendo constantemente las experiencias. En todo momento, cuando recordamos algo, estamos reactivando información que está en nuestra mente, en nuestro cerebro, y esta información, como ya verán más adelante, muestro aquí la diapositiva, está ubicada en distintos lugares de nuestro cerebro, en la zona occipital, en la temporal, en la frontal. Y lo que sucede aquí es que la información, esto es un metaanálisis, lo que vemos aquí en medio, del año 2006, hecho por Svoboda, este es un estudio más reciente, el de la derecha. En todos estos lo que vemos es los distintos lugares en donde se almacena la memoria. Por ejemplo, la información de haber venido yo aquí a esta charla. Está ubicada por todas partes en el cerebro. Por eso, cuando queremos recordar algo, básicamente, reactivamos todas estas áreas y entonces el lóbulo frontal, sobre todo el lóbulo frontal izquierdo, nos ayuda a colocar todos estos elementos juntos de una forma significativa. Y entonces ya tenemos la escena del crimen. Tenemos a este testigo que tiene la escena del crimen en su recuerdo memorial. Pero en realidad esto no es más que una reconstrucción de los distintos elementos que se han codificado cuando este testigo estaba enfrente de la escena del crimen. Y esta reconstrucción implica, y voy a volver aquí a esta diapositiva, implica la reactivación de un número de elementos que provienen de distintas cuestiones. Pueden ser muy genéricos, pueden ser más específicos. Y aquí tenemos el proceso de recuperación, que va desde el genérico hasta el específico. Y cuando yo digo me acuerdo, recuerdo, quiere decir que he reactivado este conocimiento específico de un evento. Y cada vez que bajo por este camino aquí para recordar, es decir, cada vez que un testigo informa, reporta sobre un evento y lo va repitiendo distintas veces con el tiempo, lo que esta persona hace es activar estos elementos específicos de conocimiento y pueden ser diferentes de una vez a otra, porque lo que está activando va a depender del contexto, de la información que se le da, de las preguntas que se le hacen, de cómo se le plantean estas preguntas.
Let's see where I want to go next. Yes, I want to just, and with this I will conclude this part, I want to report about two cases.
Voy a contar aquí dos ejemplos de dos asuntos de imaginería guiada. Estos dos han llevado ante los tribunales. El primero, voy a contar aquí un asunto de una víctima. Ella iba a terapia, lleva 3 años yendo a terapia, y tenía tantrums. Son estas experiencias en las que las personas no pueden contener su furia, su miedo. Pues, por ejemplo, los niños tienen este tipo de ataques. Y entonces fue a terapia. Y tras 3 años recordó que había sufrido un abuso sexual por parte de un cura. Pero ¿cómo volvió a salir esta memoria, este recuerdo? Al principio no recordaba nada. Los terapeutas empiezan a decir, bueno, vamos a dejar que te vengan cosas a la imagen. Venga, cuéntame a tu mente, cuéntame imágenes, cuéntame lo que pienses, dibuja lo que sea. Y de verdad, juro que esto fue así. La primera imagen que vino a la mente fue una V invertida, es decir, 2 líneas así. Y fueron elaborando a partir de ahí, y esto acabó convirtiéndose en una especie de paño. Y después esto lo asociaron con otra serie de imágenes, figuras, y poco a poco fue recordando un signo fuera, en bar, un nombre, y empezó a unir todo esto. Y entonces este paño acabó convirtiéndose en el hábito de un cura, y el nombre del bar era el nombre de la persona, y esta persona acabó siendo condenada. Es decir, esta mujer escribió una memoria de unas 500.000 páginas, 500.000 que no tengo aquí, pero en estas memorias de esta mujer aparecen recuerdos de este tipo. Acabo de escribir un par simplemente. Lo recuerdo muy bien este caso. Y tenía una frase en sus páginas continuamente. Y era capaz de describir, básicamente, cada día de su vida, desde los 9 años hasta los 13, en sus memorias. Y, como decía, pues era algo tipo, recuerdo muy bien, muy bien, muy bien. Y el sol jugaba con las hojas que volaban con el viento y estaba vestido de morado y tenía un cintillo en el pelo y yo tenía una coleta y tenía un cinturón morado y fui a la iglesia con mi bicicleta. También tenía una bicicleta morada porque es que me encanta el morado. Y mi madre no estaba contenta de que fuera en bicicleta porque había mucho viento y entonces me dijo, ten cuidado cuando salgas porque hace mucho viento, ten cuidado de que llegas a tiempo. Y yo estaba muy contenta de ir aquel día. En fin, cosas de este estilo, no me acuerdo exactamente de todo, pero era así, a este nivel de detalles, quiero decir. Y ella era capaz de informar, reportar la conversación, el color, los detalles minúsculos de lo que pasó ese día. Recuerdo que había polvo bajo el armario. Y recuerdo que me dijo, ¿tienes orejas? Y yo dije, sí, tengo orejas. Y me dijo entonces, quien tiene orejas entonces tiene que escuchar a los adultos porque los adultos saben más. Y cosas de este tipo, ¿no? 1000 páginas así, desde los 9 años hasta los 13 años. Y a mí me dijeron, ¿esto ha pasado? ¿Estos recuerdos son reales? Y yo dije, pues no lo sé. Bueno, en fin, evidentemente lo documenté de una forma más completa, no lo dije con estas palabras. Pero todo esto para decir que es muy difícil distinguir a veces entre los recuerdos reales y los falsos. Y existen ciertas técnicas que ayudan a las personas a desarrollar recuerdos que luego resultan problemáticas, porque ante los tribunales alguien no sabe si el testigo es fiable o no lo es. Por supuesto, el cura acabó yendo a prisión, así que los jueces tomaron esto como un recuerdo verdadero, veraz y se convirtió en fiable. También quiero contar aquí otro ejemplo, que esta vez es lo que dijo un testigo. Un testigo al que se le escuchó, también por un caso bastante similar. Ya siento que estoy hablando de estos casos tan horribles en los que estoy trabajando, pero bueno, aquí voy a hablar de homicidio. A lo mejor es un poco menos desagradable. Aquí el testigo no se acordaba de nada. No se acordaba de los hechos, del evento. Y entonces se le envió a terapia. Y el terapeuta utilizó un procedimiento de imaginería, de imágenes parecido. Bueno, no te acuerdas de nada, pero vamos a intentar recordar. Imagínate que estás allí, en el campo, con tu amigo. Y está el líder del campamento, ¿te acuerdas? Bueno, pues recuerda al líder del campamento que venía, que visitaba a esta chica por la noche en su habitación. Entonces él se lo imaginaba, claro. ¿Y podría haber pasado eso? Y él dijo, sí, podría haber pasado, no lo sé. Ahora, imagínate, y siguieron así. Y entonces, en un momento dado, él recordó, y pongo aquí entre comillas esto, recordó al chico visitando a la chica por la noche, etcétera, etcétera. Pero tras un año, decidió que esto no eran recuerdos, que esto eran construcciones que habían surgido durante la terapia. Y bueno, al final el asunto se colapsó porque él decidió retraerse de lo que había dicho. Dijo, no, a mí me han inducido a que diga esto, a que cree esto, pero realmente no lo recuerdo, no recuerdo nada. Así que volvió a su casilla de partida. Ahora, volvemos a la pregunta, ¿qué hacemos con estas evidencias o pruebas? ¿Es suficientemente bueno como medio de prueba? ¿Se puede llevar ante el tribunal? En el primer caso, el procedimiento fue el mismo, fue la víctima, y en el segundo caso hablamos de un testigo con el mismo procedimiento. En el primero de los ejemplos, la persona acabó en la cárcel, y en el segundo, en cambio, el caso se archivó. Entonces, dejo esto aquí con un punto de interrogación. ¿Qué hacemos con este tipo de medios de prueba? ¿Son adecuados? A ver, admisibles sí, claramente eran admisibles. Se admitieron sin ningún tipo de problema en todos los ejemplos. Acabo de presentar aquí en medios de prueba este tipo de ejemplos que estoy poniendo aquí. Son todos admisibles en estos asuntos jurídicos. Pero mi pregunta es otra. ¿Qué hacemos con esto? Simplemente... ¿a qué jugamos? ¿Qué juego intelectual jugamos con esto? ¿Cómo nos comportamos? ¿Y qué deberían hacer los magistrados? Aquí dejo una interrogación al aire. Bueno, me parece que es un momento de que hagamos una pausa, ¿verdad? No, todavía no. Bueno, no pasa nada. Preguntas, adelante.
Yes. 1, 2, 3, and if you can. You know, the fact that I have these lights.
Tengo las luces aquí que me dan a los ojos y no es cómodo. Por favor, adelante.
Usted habla despacio, puedo comprender yo.
Correcto.
Creo.
Correcto.
For me, it's very clear that we are never completely sure about anything.
Tienen procesos recientes, es más fácil teniendo otras evidencias.
Sometimes when we have other evidence, at the end we can get to a conclusion. And if we go back to the examples of sexual abuse, you were talking before about a child, a girl, who had been a victim of sexual abuse. So we can have her testimonial, we can have the psychological evidence and report, and then we can also have some medical report. And in that case, it's easy to link all together and to have some certainty about what's going on. Of course, we cannot have a whole conviction of what's going on, but my question here would be, if we have these cases, as examples you were presenting, would there be any methodology to adequately get to a conviction that things happened? I mean, if you have one person who is a victim of abuse, and she might have had sexual life afterwards, so maybe we cannot say that there has been any violence or violent signs. For instance, if someone was abused passively, or if someone was a minor, you cannot see the signs, or maybe you cannot get some medical evidence, so then you are lacking that one, and you would have the psychological proof and the testimony. So my question is, if we are in this case, is there a methodology to be able to discard these false remindings?
Creo que he comprendido la pregunta, no estoy segura.
I hope I understand the question, I'm not sure.
What you're asking is, first, is there a methodology to discriminate between true and false memories? And then there are, these cases have other corroborating evidence that needs to be used. For example, the medical examination in these sexual abuse cases is additional corroborating evidence. So we need to use more than one piece of evidence in order to be able to increase the level of certainty. Is that what you were saying? No. I did not understand the question.
The thing is, if it's recently, there's no problem because you can have another proofs. But if it's an event which passed
years ago?
Years ago, even the victim has sexual relationships, and you can have the medical proof, and you just have the psychological test and the testimony of the victim. Is there exists a
Methodology? Yeah.
To avoid the mistakes and to have a sentence with a sentence or a credibility of justice?
Well, again, I'm not certain I understood the question. But so if it is a case of a long time ago, you're saying. Okay, I think that if it is a case of a long time ago, it is actually more difficult to be certain. It is more difficult to be certain because because in many cases, unfortunately, the only evidence is the report of the victim. So the victim is the witness, are the same people. And there is very little corroborating evidence. So there is very little corroborating evidence in the past, unless, there is evidence that comes from the person going to hospital for medical issues that follow the abuse, for example. But there are also, there is usually very little corroborating evidence, but for the, what in some cases friends say or the mother says, and the medical evidence, unless it is a real rape, in which case there is medical evidence, but in a large number of cases the medical evidence is just that of compatibility. That's why I raised the issue yesterday with because what medical doctors say, this physical condition of the child does not show anything, basically, but it is compatible. And so I think that there is no way to really solve these problems, but trying to find real corroborating evidence, and unfortunately the medical evidence is not, in most instances, real corroborating evidence. So I think that's the problem. So we are in a situation where it's very difficult to get out. There are ways in which things should be done that actually might prevent the mistakes, but once the mistakes are made, then it's very difficult to get out of these situations and really understand what happened. That's my position. But we can discuss that over coffee later. What time is it? Because I don't want to deprive you. 3 more minutes for a question. Yes, please. Or 2 questions. 1. For 1 question. The boss has told me 1 question only, so it's not my fault.
Buenos días, muchas gracias.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I would like to ask about this belief of looking for coincidences amongst witness declarations. We are all the time trying to say we're going to corroborate things, but what we are trying to look is for things which are similar, and whenever there is a contradiction, then we become worried, and then we think that someone has made a mistake or someone has lied. And at least in my country, in Peru, in most of the cases, judges, they don't know the difference here. And I would like to talk about an example here. You were saying what happens with the projection of what we do about activities, because we already have some memories in our mind. And in the case of sexual abuse of minor or of children, I read a resolution of Spain High Supreme Court a few years ago, and they said in their conclusion that the report of the witness was probable because the girl maybe was trying to avenge their perpetrator, because the perpetrator was his mother's couple, and she thought that this person has destroyed the family, so maybe that's why she had reported things which were even worse than the real thing. So she was influenced by that. So that's my question. You were saying that we project our memories and our activities. So maybe this would depend on the things that we know, our activities, the things that we have already done. Because as far as I see it, I'm talking here about a girl who was 10 years old, so probably she wouldn't be able to have any imagination about that because she wasn't an adult. She didn't know about sexual abuse. So she was relying on all the kind of activities.
Some problems with Spanish. Maybe I have some problems in general, in spite of the coffee. So, if I understood the question, the question is, is it possible? So there was this case in which the claim has been that actually she was taking revenge, and that is definitely a possibility. And you know, there are situations in which children are, to a certain extent, used by parents in a legal dispute, for example. And so a child can take the side of either the mother or the father and can report things that, on one hand, they are coached by the parents to say. So the exaggeration can come from the parents and not from themselves. There are other cases in which the exaggerations are just the creation of the child because they want to please. In this case, they know that they are exaggerating, okay? In both cases, actually, the children know that they are exaggerating, so I think that in this case, it should be possible through a correct type of questioning to understand if these exaggerations are motivated and where they come from, especially in children who are at this age. You're mentioning 10 years old, right? But yes, you know, children definitely can lie to please relatives, and they can also exaggerate spontaneously, especially younger children, but also children at that age. Just to, you know, there are many psychological factors in here that go into the clinical psychology component, but a child, I have in mind the case of a child who became the protagonist all of a sudden of a case, and that level of protagonism was actually helping her, you know, it was like becoming, you know, like drinking a lot of wine and being high on wine, and becoming a little drunk on the fame that actually she obtained and the attention that she obtained. So sometimes children exaggerate also just to maintain the level of attention that all these adults all of a sudden have about them. So there are many different components, and I think that actually a good psychologist is able to discriminate among them. And I don't know if I answered your question because, sorry, I have some problems understanding questions this morning in spite of the little sips of coffee that I had. But if you have questions, I'm available also for coffee. And then we will meet here again at 11. Okay. And thank you for bearing with me.